everybody, and welcome to Unit 18. If you're new or if you return, you're very welcome. My name is Mary Coakley, and I look after this space for Trinity, which is really about reaching out into the community, getting to know our neighbours, sharing information and people. And we're very lucky to have such a good range of expertise and willing speakers, people who can come along and give great talks. No pressure, Shane. So, this is the fourth, the last one of the series. Do get in touch if you feel like you have good ideas for other speakers in Trinity, or you want to hear about a particular topic, or just generally feedback on what you thought. I don't take any of it personally. I'll blame somebody else. So feel free to let us know. As you know, we're videoing the event, and any you missed, they'll be on the Trinity College YouTube site. Thank you again to Professor Lorraine Leeson. As you know, some of you who were here before know Lorraine is a professor in Deaf Studies at the Centre for Deaf Studies and now Associate Vice Provost for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. So she's a very busy lady, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you. The person instrumental in all of this, who brings a lot of people together and is a great community activist, Betty Ash. As many of you know, she hasn't been well in the last few weeks, so certainly big shout out and thank you and to her and thinking of her in her recovery. Yes, thank you, Betty. So finally, before I introduce Shane, just stay around for a glass of wine or a cup of tea if you are available after, to celebrate all being here, and to thank you for coming. So finally, and very much appreciate again Professor Shane O'Mara coming here today. So he is Professor of Experimental Brain Research in Trinity in the School of Psychology, and Principal Investigator, and was the Director of the Trinity College Institute of Neuroscience from 2009 to 16. He's elected a member of the Royal Irish Academy. His research concerns the brain systems supporting learning and memory and how they are affected by stress and depression. And he says he's interested in understanding how the brain meets the world. He has published widely and edited many journals and books. I know some of you have some of his books. His blog is brainpizza.com on neuroscience, psychology, science, and public policy related themes, and also other things. So look forward to hearing from him, and thank you, Shane.
Hi all, and thank you very much for coming along to hear what I have to say today. So as Mary said, what I've spent most of my career working on is issues to do with memory, how the brain can have memories and how they're affected by disease conditions. And the one that people think mostly of is, of course, Alzheimer's disease, and the counterpart to memory is thinking about amnesia. So what I'm going to do today is talk about a couple of disparate themes, and I'm going to show how they're all connected together. One of the things the brain is very good at doing is using the same brain regions to do multiple things. So the brain region I'm going to talk a bit about today is a brain region called the hippocampal formation. It's concerned with memory. You damage it, you're going to have amnesia. But you're also going to lose your orientation in time and space, and you're also going to lose your ability to imagine the future. So it bundles a whole lot of things together. Now, the question is, how do we know these things? Well, we know them by careful examination of patients. So this chap here is Henry Molaison. He died in 2008, and Henry, it is thought, had a road traffic accident at the age of about 9 or 10. This was back in the 1930s. The medical records are very poor. He allegedly had a traffic accident in the late 1930s. The medical records are very, very poor. He lived in Hartford, Connecticut in the USA. But soon after this alleged accident, he started to have epileptic fits. And these epileptic fits were very, very severely disabling. They became very progressive, and he ended up having somewhere between 50 and 100 fits per day. So you can imagine how disabled he was in the course of his life. Now, the drugs that were available for controlling his epilepsy at the time were really poor, and they just didn't control the condition that he had. So he ended up undergoing what was called a frankly experimental operation. And I'll explain why it was an experimental operation in a moment. Targeting this structure, the hippocampus, or sometimes called the hippocampal formation. Now, why was that? When you measured the activity in his brain, what you could see was lots of epileptic activity in the hippocampal formation. You have two of them. They extend from about the top of the ear to the temple. And at the time, it was thought this structure had something to do with smell, might have had something to do with emotion, but really didn't have any other function. And the data that were available basically suggested it was a silent brain region. So William Scoville, who was the surgeon, suggested the removal of this structure might affect, in a good way, his epilepsy. And that turned out to be true. HM had the operation in his mid-20s, and his epileptic seizures were abolished. So this was an absolutely remarkable result, going from 100 fits or 50 fits a day down to 0. That was fine, but the consequence was really something that was very, very unexpected. HM had the purest case after this operation of severe and intractable amnesia that's ever been seen in the literature. It did not resolve even after 50 years post-operation. Now, I'll talk a bit about what I mean by amnesia. So, these are data from the 1960s showing the things he could and could not do. But we can summarize them very easily. His amnesia did not affect remote memories. So he could remember going to school, he knew who his parents were, he knew which foods he liked, he didn't lose his ability to count, all of those kinds of things that he learned in the course of his childhood. What he lost was the ability to form new memories. So this is what's called an anterograde amnesia. It's not a retrograde amnesia. Remarkably though, his short-term memory was normal. So if you gave him a telephone number to repeat or a short piece of prose to repeat, he could repeat it until you distracted him, and then he would lose it. It never, ever stuck. Now, what he could do, though, was learn motor skills. So he could learn to write backwards in a mirror, or using a mirror, and you can see that his performance gets better every day over the course of 3 days. But he never knew he could do this. So every time he was asked to do this task, he would deny his ability to do it. And remarkably, his IQ did not change. If anything, it rose slightly from pre to post operation because he was no longer on this drug regime which damped down his brain activity. He couldn't remember faces though. He was really, really poor at remembering people's faces. If you gave him pictures and names to learn, he just couldn't do it. But his ability to engage in a task where you have to learn what the right response is, so you're given cards in order to earn monetary rewards, and you have to figure out what card is associated with what reward. He could do that very, very well. He made very, very few errors. So his ability to reason is fine, but his ability to learn new faces is lost, and his ability to learn new things in the course of his everyday life is lost, but not his ability to recall his past. So this is, as I've said, what's known as an anterograde amnesia. It's one that's forward-facing, one that happens for the rest of his life. Now, this is a quote. Did he know there was something wrong with him? Yes, he did. So amnesia does not come with lack of insight. So this is a quote from 1970. And he says, "Every day is alone in itself, whatever enjoyment I've had and whatever sorrow I've had. Right now I'm wondering, have I done or said anything amiss? You see, at this moment, everything looks clear." And I'm going to come back to that theme of everything looking clear. But what happened just before? That's what worries me. It's like waking from a dream. I just don't remember. So he's here in the present. What is happening to him now is clear. What has happened a minute ago is not. And as we'll see, he also couldn't imagine what would happen to him in the future. So there's something very, very interesting and unusual about this case. And it caused a revolution in how we understand how the brain might have brain systems that are responsible for memory, and the hippocampal formation becomes a good place to look when you start to think about disorders like Alzheimer's disease, which have a loss of memory implied in them. A different way of thinking about it is that when HM was in conversations, which is something that we humans do all the time, nothing stuck. No gossip, no social memories, anything and everything that he was told in the course of his everyday life is lost within seconds. So that's a really interesting phenomenon. What it really means is that his memory is no longer capable of being updated by the normal conversations that we have with each other, the stories we tell each other, the gossip and all of those things that we engage in. But there's another problem. If you have this kind of amnesia, it means that you have to have a life in the care of others. What do I mean by that? It means that in the course of your everyday life, we exchange memories with each other all the time. We tell each other what we've been doing. We tell each other what our intentions are, what it is that we're going to do, all of those kinds of things. And that information sticks. In Henry's case, it doesn't. So you can't tell him that it's lunchtime at 2 o'clock today instead of 1 o'clock, because he's not going to know. He's not going to remember. He's going to have somebody bring him physically to lunch at the time that lunch is supposed to happen. Because this means that you can't, in effect, create a new kind of shared reality together where you update what it is that you know about your environment, about your social world, on the basis of the conversations that you're having with people. So that's a really interesting way of looking at amnesia. It means that we shouldn't be thinking about amnesia as something that's backward facing, it's all to do with stuff we can't recall. It's actually much more to do with the scaffolding of everyday life, how it is that we talk to each other, how we update what we know, what you know from conversation together. Now, we can push these thoughts a little bit further. And one way to think about it is that when we talk with each other, one of the things that we do all the time is remember in conversation. Sometimes we're trying to remember together. I might remember some of the people I was in school with, for example, and a friend of mine might remember some others. And we're studying a picture from many years ago, and jointly we're able to figure out who all those faces in the black and white photo are. It's a very simple example. But often it's things like, where did I park the car? And your partner says, it's over in that side of the car park. And you say, no, it's on the other side. And eventually you work out together, you're both wrong, it's somewhere in the middle. But the point is that we do this all the time and we don't notice. So a little challenge for you is to think about, during the next conversation you're having with somebody, what you're pulling out of memory and telling the other person about yourself, what it is that you've been doing, or what it is that you plan to do, because you have to remember what it is that you plan to do. It's a kind of memory called a prospective memory. Now, if you imagine trying to create a sports team out of a group of Henrys, would that be possible? Now, the answer is no. You have to have memories that stick. If the coach is not able to engage in drills with the team members and they're not able to remember the rules, they're not able to remember the moves, all of those kinds of things, it's simply not possible. So that kind of collaborative memory that happens in a sports context is simply impossible, again resulting from this kind of damage. So a different way of thinking about this is that what we really do in the course of everyday life, without ever noticing, is we engage in a kind of a continuous, always-on recall of social memories, or memories that serve social purposes. I'm telling you things, you're telling me things, we're gossiping, in other words. And we do this in a way that allows us to create our complex social lives together. If we weren't able to do this, we'd be much more similar to chimpanzees who can't talk and can only communicate in howls or other kind of call signs like that. But the kind of basic thing that we do in everyday life is something that is impossible for a chimpanzee or a baboon or a firefly or whatever it happens to be, because we have this unique capacity, this ability to bring language and memory together in the service of our social lives. Now, we can push the point further. This happens all the time. People have group conversations. They talk about what it is that they think they know, and we adjust what it is that we recall based on the conversation that happens in our groups. And you've all experienced this. You've gone to the pub, you've had a conversation about a football match or about some event or another. One person recalls one thing, another recalls something slightly else, and over the course of the conversation, you come to a consensus about what it is that is likely to have happened. And more than that, we also use group conversation to say what is reasonable to talk about. There are things that you're allowed to bring into the conversation, and there are things that are excluded from the conversation. And that moves on all the time. Things that we would have had a horror of talking about 20 or 30 years ago in this country, we're now actually willing to talk about. So the conversation does move on. Now, just to emphasize this point again, most of what we think about memory, or what comes to mind, is that it's about the past, that it's something to do with recalling what we know. And I think we need to turn that around completely and actually say that what we use memory for, we draw on our past experiences, not so that we can recall them perfectly, because we have remarkably poor memories. What we instead do is we draw on our memories to interpret what's going on in the present. We bring that knowledge to bear on the present. In other words, we're responding to the demands of the present time and place. But we can go much, much further. I've said already about the relationship, or I've hinted at the relationship between memory and imagination. Henry and amnesics like Henry are not able to imagine the future. Now, if I were to ask anyone here, what are you going to do next week? You'll have a bit of an idea. You may not know in detail. If I ask you what you're going to be doing on December the 26th, you're going to have a very good idea what you're doing. If I'm going to ask you what you're going to do next summer, you might say, well, we're thinking of going on a holiday to somewhere like this. People like Henry will say, what are you going to do tomorrow? More or less what I'm doing today. But next week, he'll give you an answer again, reflecting what's happening today. Next year, it's the same deal. They're not able to imagine the future or futures, and they're not able to imagine alternative futures together. And this is, again, something that we do all the time. You sit down at the family table and you think about the holiday you're going to take with your partner, with your kids next year, and you have a debate about it. You figure out who's free when, who can do what when, how much money you've got, who's got the job of looking up the flights, all of that stuff. That's something you do collaboratively. And people bring different pieces of information together. One will say, we're going to Tuscany. We're not going to the caravan park in Connemara again. We got washed out. Or somebody says, we're never going to the Connemara caravan park because they remember being there when they were 8 and it was terrible. That may or may not be true, by the way. I'm from Galway, so I can throw a slight insult at Connemara, which I don't really mean. But the key point here is that we're rehearsing things that have not happened yet together. And this is impossible in the case of amnesia. Now, I should have said, and I'll say it now, many other cases like Henry's have come to light since his case was discovered. Typically people who've had viral infections that have destroyed the hippocampal formation on both sides of the brain. And there have been numerous case studies right up to the present day of such individuals. And similarly, people with Alzheimer's disease or with mild cognitive impairment, which is the condition that happens prior to the full onset of Alzheimer's disease, show dramatic blunting in their ability to imagine what will happen in the future. They're led by what's happening in the present. And sometimes they also suffer from a condition known as mind blanking. They just have nothing. Nothing comes to mind at all. So the point I want to kind of push a little bit further is that we engage in this kind of person-to-person transmission of information all the time. It's absolutely a normal facet of human life, and we use it to imagine the communities that we are part of. Nobody knows everybody who lives on Pier Street. That would be very unusual. There's 4,000 people probably live in this mile down into Ringsend. It would be very hard to know everybody, but everybody will have a certain identity around that. There's a great, he's sadly recently deceased Irish political scientist, Benedict Anderson, who gave us this wonderful phrase, imagined communities. And his idea is a really interesting one, that nobody, take Ireland as an example of a nation. We're sitting here in Dublin. How many people do you know in Donegal? Probably not many, maybe some. But certainly, Donegal is a population, 200,000, 250,000. It's not possible for you to know them all. But we admit them all to being part of the same community. And that community necessarily has to be an imagined one, because you can't know everybody that's in that community. So a different way of thinking about that is that our memories that we draw on, the conversations that we have in the present, and the relationships that our memories allow us to sustain with each other, allow us to create these communities together, because we can draw on all of this information. Amnesics, I've given the small-scale example of a team of Henrys trying to create a football team together. That's impossible. Chimpanzees or baboons or whatever, similarly, don't engage in this kind of activity. They're not able to imagine alternative worlds for themselves. So kind of the next point that I'm going to make is a really straightforward one. When we talk to each other, we adjust what each other knows and what each other person or the other person will remember. And a nice way of thinking about this is that your memory is like a Wikipedia page. You can update it, and you do, but others can update it too. And you won't necessarily remember exactly how that updating happened. So the point that really I want to get to, I suppose, again, is to think that we shouldn't be thinking about our thoughts, our memories, our imaginings as being purely within our heads. They're actually transactional. They allow us to engage in activity together, especially social activity. And I think at some point, conversations have happened, and we know they've happened in this country, about what the nation should be. They're happening all the time. If you look at this map, I think it's 1488, these are all the kingdoms that were in Europe at the time. Look at France, it's just a patchwork. Look at Russia, well over there. It expanded its territory over the years. Look at the patchwork that is Bavaria and Poland. Those countries had to come together. The principalities, the little kingdoms, all of those kinds of things. And how did they come together? They came together because somebody sat down and said, we're having that. We're taking that, we're merging with that, or whatever it happens to be. In other words, all of these nations had to begin as a conversation. They did not just fall out of the sky. And proof of that is very simple. Since 1990, how many countries have come into being and come to be recognized by the UN? Anybody want to guess? The answer is 30. And even here in the heart of Europe, 2 countries came into being a number of years ago. Czechoslovakia no longer exists. You have Czechia and Slovakia, and they're now independent nations. And they're very, very different nations. How did that happen? It didn't happen because some canonical list of nations was handed down from on high. It happened because people said we want to be together, we don't want to be together. In other words, conversation, which doesn't leave much by way of traces, is actually at the core of all of these things. Now I'm going to shift gear dramatically, and I'm going to talk about walking for a bit. I love to walk, and one of the best ways to talk, in my view, is during a walk. Social walking is a wonderful thing to do. And walking, I will also claim, is a balm for your body as well as for your brain. It does all sorts of good things for you. So let's just think about this idea. So I'm going to show a bit of data over the next few slides. I hope that's okay. So this is a lovely simple paper which was published a couple of years ago. And what they did in this paper was get university students to do one of 2 things. They were told that what they were going to do is judge the beauty of buildings around the Iowa State University campus. And half of the students were brought to a lab where they looked at pictures. The other half were brought for a walk where they were pointed toward particular buildings. And their job was just to give a numerical rating about how much they liked or did not like the buildings that they were looking at. And at the start, they were also asked how they were feeling. And they were asked to give a little rating for that. And what you found is really quite amazing. People who sat down and made these aesthetic judgments didn't experience any lift in how they felt. But people who went for the walk and just looked at these same buildings self-rated a big jump in how they felt. Now, this is obviously just in the moment, but it also worked even for people who hate walking. They call this the dread walking condition. The ones who would prefer to, I guess, go around on a golf cart or something like that. They even compared to the group that were left sitting in the lab just making judgments about pictures. So this is a very small scale study, and it's over a short time scale. But there are some absolutely marvellous studies. This is Samuel Harvey and his colleagues in Australia. And what they've done is follow, and they're still doing this, a huge cohort, about 34,000 people. They've been following them for about 12 or 14 years now. And one of the things they do is measure levels of activity. And what they're generally interested in is the relationship between movement, activity, all of those kinds of things, and depression, or whether or not you're likely to suffer from depression. And what they found is really quite remarkable. With very little by way of activity, just a couple of hours a week, an hour at least, about 12% of cases of depression were prevented as a result of engaging in minimal amounts of activity. In other words, being wholly sedentary is really, really bad for you. But getting a boost that will prevent you from getting depression, or the likelihood of getting depression, is something that you can get with minimal levels of activity, just going out for a good stiff walk for about an hour once a week. And the other conclusion that they came to, which I think was a really important one, was that the effect is about the same as the effect that you would get from being on drug treatment for depression. So the claim here is quite a remarkable one. And there's lots of data have come along in the meantime to show actually that exercise is a very effective prophylactic against depression, and it would appear anxiety disorders as well. Okay, now I'm going to talk about creativity for a moment and creative walking. This is, I don't know if anybody here recognises this man. This is Sir William Rowan Hamilton, Ireland's greatest mathematician. He invented all sorts of weird and wonderful mathematics, including something called quaternions, which I just don't understand, and I'm not going to pretend to. The key point about quaternions is that it's a very strange form of mathematics, where 3 plus 4 does not equal 4 plus 3, so it's not commutative. Now, quaternions sat as a kind of an interesting mathematical abstraction for about 100 years after his death, but they're now used in computer gaming really, really extensively. The graphics driver that allows us to look at him is quaternion based. And they're also used to solve motion in electric toothbrushes. Now, he invented lots of other mathematics, but he used to think about maths an awful lot. So he was the Royal Observer, or whatever his title was back then, and he would walk from Dunsink to Trinity most days, which is a walk of about 2.25 hours. And he thought about this quaternion problem for weeks and weeks and weeks, and then eventually discovered the solution crossing Broome Bridge. And he had no pen, but he had a tobacco knife. So he carved the solution into a stone on the bridge, and if you go to Broome Bridge, you'll see this little plaque at the site where he carved the solution. It's I squared equals j squared equals k squared equals ijk equals -1. There you go. That's the... But here's the great thing about it. He wrote about it, and he wrote a fabulous sentence. Here there dawned on me the notion that we must admit, in some sense, a fourth dimension of space for the purpose of calculating with triples. This is the line I love. An electric circuit seemed to close and a spark flashed forth. That's the moment of creativity, the moment of insight, where he had solved the problem. And he attributed it to his long daily walks. He wasn't being interrupted. He didn't have people demanding of him to speak about this, that, and the other. He could just spend his time thinking. And then, of course, this day he forgot to bring his pen, but nonetheless, he had a tobacco knife. Now, will walking make you more creative? Well, we can actually answer that question now. So here's a paper from a couple of years ago by Opezzo and Schwartz. one of the tests for creativity is to hand people, while they're sitting at a table, a series of common objects. And your job is to come up with as many uses for those objects in 10 seconds or 20 seconds as you possibly can. Some people are really good at this. Some people are really poor at it. You hand them a paper clip and all they'll think is, well, it's for clipping paper together. But other people will come up with many uses for them. And people reliably vary in their ability to do this task. What Opezzo and Schwartz did was ask people to engage in this divergent thinking task, but they got the people to either walk for 10 minutes before doing the task or just had them seated for 10 minutes before doing the task. And people who walked for 10 minutes before having to do a divergent thinking task generated about twice as many ideas on average compared to people who were seated for the same period of time. Now, convergent thinking is just thinking of things that have unique solutions. 2 + 2 is 4. There's no other answer to that. And they went on and did all sorts of other interesting manipulations. They asked people to sit on treadmills, to walk on treadmills, and all of those kinds of things. And the general conclusion that they came to was that going for a walk before engaging in some sort of creative thinking gives you a good boost to creativity. And this is something, of course, that novelists and poets and others have known for decades, if not hundreds of years. It used to be said that Immanuel Kant, for example, the great philosopher, you could set the town clock in Regensburg by him because he was so regular in terms of the time that he would go walking at. Now, I'll just skip that, it doesn't matter. Now, a stereotype is, of course, that older people are less creative. I don't think that's true. The data aren't very good where this is concerned, but certainly the stereotype is. Now, is there a simple hack to increase creative thinking as you get older? Well, the answer is to go on free walking. So this study did the Opezzo and Schwartz study, but what they did was get people in their late 60s and early 70s to go for 10-minute walks and compared their performance to seated people in their late 60s or early 70s or seated people in their late teens or early 20s. And what you can see is that walking allows the older group to generate probably about 50%, if not 100% more ideas compared to people who are seated for the same or for the same period of time. The simple takeaway here is that if you have a problem that you can't solve, don't just sit there thinking about it. Get up, move, go out into the world, stop thinking about it for a minute perhaps, and then come back. You may find that the solution is sitting there waiting for you. So I think we should just put a line through that. That's an unfair thing to say. And they've got lots of other data in the paper, but the key point is that in people who are older, just going out for a walk is enough to give a nice boost to creativity. Now, let's just try and bring all of these thoughts together. This is a paper by Jill Livingston. The original version was published in 2017. They did an update in 2020, and they've just released a new update just recently on dementia prevention, intervention and care. And I think this is one of the most exciting and most important papers I've ever read, and I'll tell you why now. What they show, so this is from birth all the way down to end of life. And what they show in this paper and in the most recent estimates is that about 50% of cases of dementia, certainly 45% of cases, can be prevented from occurring in the first place by changing how we live our lives. So they give estimates for different aspects of these things. So people who've had early life education are much less likely to have dementia compared to people who've had no education in early life. One thing that they picked up on, which is something that was not expected, is screening for hearing loss in midlife. If people had their hearing restored to normal, would prevent about 9% of future cases of dementia. And there's a whole variety of other things. The key thing here is that these are things we can do. We don't have to smoke. We can cut down the amount of drinking that we engage in. We can become socially active. We can get out and move in the world. And what they do is put these ideas together in this key slide. And there's 3 points here. One is regular activity, exercise, a couple of times a week, I think preferably with other people. Engaging in lifelong learning, not giving up education early in life and never returning to it. And maintaining a rich social network, so being socially involved. And those 3 things probably, I hesitate to put an exact number on it, but putting those together would have a very profound effect on the likelihood that in late life you will have dementia or not. In other words, these are things that we can change, they're modifiable. And if you prevent yourself from getting the condition in the first place, you're much better off than trying to cure it after the fact. And we know this for all disease conditions. You're better off not having lung cancer. Curing it is really hard. So don't smoke, and you're going to reduce the possibility of getting lung cancer. Okay, so I'm going to finish at this point. What I really just want to say is that we shouldn't think that thoughts or the things that we imagine are not real. When we can make them real by articulating them, by talking to others. We share our thoughts and memories with each other, and this is something actually we do all the time. And our imaginations are not airy-fairy things. Our imaginations allow us to plan our lives. They allow us to say, I'm going to do this. I don't really like the sound of doing that. Perhaps I can do something else. All of those kinds of thoughts that we engage in about things that haven't happened have to be in our imagination. They're not, they can't be anywhere else. And the key thing is that we, of course, can do this together. We can sit down and change our futures by having thoughts about how we might do things differently together. Just to mention, or by way of advertising, this is a book I wrote on walking a couple of years ago, and this is a book on conversation, which I've just brought out. Both available in Hodges Figgis. This one is signed by the author, and it's just out in paperback. I'll stop there. Thank you.
That was fantastic, Shane. Certainly make us think about the way we talk, I think, or have conversations. We're going to open up to questions, and I'll bring the mic, but actually it made me think about your point there about deaf getting a hearing test. What's midlife?
Midlife is in your 50s.
Let's go and do that. Who wants to start with the questions? Any thoughts? Or there we go.
Thanks very much. That was really interesting. And I'll never say I'm going for a walk to clear my head again. I'm now going for a walk to kickstart my brain. I just was wondering how you feel about, you know, the way some people never really have good memories. Some people have great memories, have had memory all their life. Some people just don't. And is there a difference when those two people get older? Does it affect them in a different way?
Yeah, so I'm not convinced that you're correct. The first thing is that
brutal memory. Brutal.
No, you think you do, but you're able to speak. You're able to tell me what foods you like. You tell me who the members of your family are. All of those kinds.
I don't remember their birthdays.
That's okay. That's okay. You've got somebody else to remember that, or you've got a calendar to remember it. You know, or it's in your phone. Like I don't know any telephone numbers anymore. I used to know them all, but now I've got a couple of hundred in my phone, and we just offload these things. You know, it's a smart use of brain space not to clutter up your head with these things. Now, there are people who do have kind of poor memories, but the issue there is their memory poor, or is it that they're simply not paying attention in the moment? Those two things are very, very commonly confounded because, of course, those people who you say have poor memories they can, you know, recite the alphabet, they can sing songs, they know where they are in time and space, they know what their preferences for things are. You know, it just may be that they're thinking thoughts to themselves when they're not paying much attention to the outside world. And you have to kind of tease those two things apart.
Shane, thank you very much. It's very interesting. Can you train your memory?
Yes, you certainly can. So the best method of training your memory is what's known as retrieval practice. You'll see all of these devices out there in the market that show you how to present things to people in efficient ways and all that kind of thing. But really the key thing for making your memory get better is regularly pulling pieces of information out of it. And I give you an example. If you're learning a new language, you can spend a lot of time looking at words, underlining them, highlighting them, looking at sentences, all of that kind of thing. And you'll actually have a very poor grasp of the language that you're trying to speak. But if you're put in a situation where you have total immersion, you have no access to a dictionary, and you have to rely on what's in here, and you have to pull out the information that you've learned, what you find in that circumstance is the repeated pulling out of the information strengthens learning. It's not pleasant, but you see students making the mistake all the time of highlighting and doing all of these kinds of things, and it's actually a very poor use of their time. What they really need to do is challenge their memory by answering questions and by pulling information out, rather than spending your time trying to figure out a more efficient way of encoding it.
Can I ask, does writing it down then?
Writing it down by itself is pointless. As I know, students take notes in lectures and then they never look at them again. So that is, what you have to do is take the notes in the lecture, devise a series of questions, write out answers to those questions without reference to your notes, then go back and check what you've written against your notes and elaborate your notes on that basis. That's a much harder thing to do. It's much easier to sit there and highlight and underline and all that kind of stuff. You've got something going in through your eyeballs, sitting there and working memory for a little while, and then it's lost. But actively engaging in recall, that's by far the best thing.
Thank you very much for the lecture, firstly. Just to follow up on what you're after saying there, would that not mean then that the Google era are at a disadvantage if you're just going immediately to your phone to bring up something rather than going through your memory to try and bring it to the forefront?
Yeah, I don't think so.
You don't?
No,
yeah.
no.
Okay, no.
To me, this is just a kind of cognitive offloading. We've done this with books, we do it with notes, and now we just have another method of doing it. It extends the range of your cognition rather than limits it.
But like what I would mean is going deeper into the memory rather than, maybe I'm not explaining it very well.
No.
It's just that I feel everything, like you were saying, you're going for a walk and all that, and going for a walk, and people perform better, at tasks when they come back from a walk. But like you see, most people walking nowadays have their heads in phones, and I'm wondering, is that, like when you go for a walk, is it the stimulation of what you see? Is it that does it, or is it the actual physical activity of the walk itself, or is it a combination of the two?
Yeah, so where that's concerned, we don't know is the answer. So the problem we have is that you've got one word, which is walking, and you've got the purpose of the walk. So you don't know, and I don't know, those people that are listening or using their phones, why they're doing that. Is it because they're wanting to learn a new song? Are they listening to an audio book? There's a lot of things that a phone allows you to do that we couldn't do 10 or 20 years ago. I don't see any evidence at all, like quantitative evidence, that the presence of Google worsens your memory in any way, shape or form. It actually, if you don't know the answer, what did you do before? You went to an encyclopedia, you asked somebody. Now you go to the online encyclopedia or you ask somebody. I don't see what the problem is myself. And now you can, look up something in Italian, Google Translate will translate it for you. It just makes life a little bit easier. I think there's a frictionless aspect to it that I think is worthwhile.
Thank you.
Not a question as such, but or an observation, which we're saying, if you're doing the likes of crosswords or Sudoku and things like that, and you come down to the more difficult parts, but Yes, I've always found that. Put it down, walk away. Don't go on a walk now, but it's just something else in the house or whatever you're doing. Then you come back to it and you look, well, why didn't I say that before? So that just the break alone and doing it, something else.
That is for
is the benefit.
yeah. There's a load of data on problem solving showing that just putting the problem that's annoying you down. Now, walking might help. Very often does help, but even just having a sleep, having a nap, and then coming back to it, having a rest, just blanking out for a while, it works very, very well. And there's all sorts of reasons for this, but a lot of the thinking that we engage in is actually non-conscious. You know, we think always about the thoughts that we're aware of, but there's stuff going on in there all the time. So if I ask you all, you can all do this. What's the colour of your front door? You've got it straight away without thinking about it. So that means you've got a whole machinery of memory ready to deliver an answer into consciousness all the time. And that stuff has always been worked on. And one of the key times that it's worked on is during sleep. And we know with absolute certainty that a good night's sleep is necessary for normal memory function. And you know this because when you stay up all night and try and drive your car, it's not a good idea. You can't remember how to do it properly. It's not just about coordination, it's about making the right decision at the right time, which means drawing on the right piece of information at that time.
Okay, yeah. When I was a student, I read a book about how to make sure you remembered things. And there's two questions behind this. One is, it said two things, and more recently also on Scientific American Mind, that if you took comprehensive notes and reread them within 48 hours, that they stayed in your memory much more effectively. But one of the ways of getting rid of all of it from your memory was to have too much to drink. I don't know if either are accurate, you know.
Yeah, well, alcohol is a central nervous system depressant, but it has multiple effects. It disinhibits you, it does all sorts of things, and it can kill you, you know, if you drink too much of it. And there's certainly an interaction between alcohol and recall. We don't really know precisely the reasons why. It's probably because it damps down activity in the hippocampal formation. The Scientific American thing is wrong, or else I'm going to be really bold here and say you're remembering it wrong. Reading notes 48 hours after you've written them does not boost your recall for them. Answering questions about the notes that you've taken 48 hours previously does. And then going back and looking at the notes. So I suspect there's that little bit in the middle is probably the... Yes, and it's very rare. It's so-called I always find this word really hard to pronounce, hyperamnestic memory. There aren't very many cases. There's a Russian neuropsychologist, Alexander Luria, wrote an amazing book, which was translated into English a number of years ago, called The Mind of a Menemist. Sorry, my ability to pronounce that word is hard. And he had a patient for who had total recall for almost everything. But the problem was that guy's life was utter hell. Because everything caused a chain of association with everything else. So he'd be sitting in the chair like you were sitting, and he'd remember the 3,000 other occasions that he'd been sitting in the chair. He'd remember the clothes, he'd remember who he was with. And he ended up wanting to live a life where he reduced everything in his life to almost nothing in order to escape from this association hell. There's a woman in California who Larry Squire, the neuropsychologist, studied as well. And she has amazing recall as well. But she hates it as well. And, you know, we succumb to this idea that we should have perfect recall. Actually, perfect recall is horrible. Our brains are generally not designed to do that. Our brains are designed to recall what's useful when we need to know it. And having this unbidden recall of everything that's ever happened around a particular event is actually a very unpleasant way to live your life. There are a few other cases, but they tend to be rare, and I mean really rare. They get lots of media coverage, but In the population at large, there aren't many such cases.
Thank you for the lecture. Sometimes, like I'm talking about me, sometimes like you can have a key in your hands and you start looking for it. And
I'm sorry, could you speak up just a little? We can't hear you.
Like you have a key in the hands
Yeah.
and you start looking for it. And sometimes you come out and you can't find your parking space. You know, and then you think you're getting mad. How do you come back to it? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I know.
It happens to everybody, but,
In fact,
but
there's a really interesting literature on this that I find myself looking for my glasses and they're up here, or I'll pat myself here, but actually my glasses are over here. And what typically happens is during what's called an action cycle, you're interrupted or your attention is distracted in some way. That you've got the key in your hand and you've had a thought about something, or you've heard a noise, or somebody calls you, and then you go back to what it was you were doing, but you go back to an earlier point, which is you have to get the key, and you forgot the damn thing is in your hand. So it's actually turns out mostly to be a failure of attention and distraction rather than a failure of memory. So concentration is the thing.
Final question over here, maybe?
Fascinating. I don't want to put you on the spot, but as against a baseline for an average man of his age, how would you assess Donald J. Trump? And should he do more walking?
So I think it's a terrible world we live in. That we all know far more about the president of a country 3,000 miles away than perhaps than we should. I know Trump has weird ideas about exercise. He has this idea that exercise is something that runs you down. You've got a finite amount of energy, and that was a theory for quite a while. But actually, it turns out that you recharge your ability to exercise by engaging in exercise. He did that daft memory test, you know, where anybody can ace. I hesitate to. I'd be serious here for a moment. Both he and Biden have the phrase dementia thrown at them regularly. There's no evidence that either of them have dementia. The criteria, clinical criteria for dementia are very, very clear. It's a change in social, occupational, or personal functioning that's noticeable to others and which prevents the person from engaging in the normal activities of daily life and which is progressive. These two guys don't have that. They have age-related changes. There's no doubt about that. Biden is physically much frailer than he was 4 years ago. Trump doesn't appear to be physically frailer to me. Maybe he is, but what he does do, though, which is he has this peculiar kind of phenomenon where when he's speaking, he calls it, I know he started calling it the weave, but where he kind of engages in what's called a phonemic paraphasia, where he kind of mixes up syllables and things like that. You know, Biden had a similar kind of phenomenon, which he kind of trained himself a bit out of because he had a stutter. So I think he probably has, you know, a decent amount of age-related decline because he is 78. He eats a very bad diet. He doesn't take any exercise and doesn't listen to anybody. Does that remind you of anyone? But I don't think there's any good evidence that he has clinical dementia. He might have other things.
Thank you very much. I'm trying to find an excuse for him.
I don't know if there is one.
A much more simple question. In the context of assimilating information, so one tries to process the information, maybe leave it and go back and question oneself on it to test the power of recall. Any other tips?
That's the best one. Is dragging the information back out again, thinking about it and writing it down in a variety of different contexts, and trying to relate it to other things that you know. Retrieval practice is by far the best method. There are other things that people do, you know, to do with conceptual mapping and or this perpetual student thing of underlining things. But really, if you want to use memories or learn in a very effective way, what you have to do is use what it is that you're learning. If you don't lose it or use it, you're going to lose it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.